So, you know, I don't see Romney doing a Hail Mary sort of, that's just not his personality. He obviously has a very different personality than John McCain, who was a maverick and wild and, you know, totally different personality. So I don't see him doing that kind of a vice presidential pick. So I want to talk quickly. I wouldn't necessarily begin this way, but because of where I am, I just want to touch on the libertarian idea. Because I interviewed plenty of libertarians when I was doing this book. A lot of them are registered independents. And a number of them told me that they voted for Ron Paul 4 years ago. And I think Ron Paul has obviously appealed to these kind of voters. I don't really know where Ron Paul goes now. He has said he doesn't want to run as a libertarian candidate. I was actually on the Dylan Ratigan show a couple of weeks ago with Gary, the former governor of New Mexico, Gary J. Johnson, who is I guess the official, he doesn't have the nomination yet, but the official libertarian candidate. And then of course you have this Americans Elect effort, and I don't know who they're going to appeal to. This is this online effort. So I think we've seen this independent sector, which includes libertarians, being very dissatisfied with what they're getting from the two parties. And the voters that I focused on, I didn't focus, of course, exclusively on libertarians. I would say I talk about the center because I think the center swings. And I would say most of the people I interviewed for the book are libertarian when it comes to social issues. They were very much, the government doesn't belong in those issues, gay rights, abortion, all this kind of thing. No, you know, come on, we're past that. That was most of the people that I interviewed. But I would suspect they like a little more government than the libertarians, the people that are in this sort of center sphere. But they do, polling has also shown, Pew polling, Gallup polling, has also shown that the deficit is they want government, but they want government to work. And they want government to be efficient, and they want the deficit addressed. And polling has shown that for these independent voters, the deficit is as high or higher than for Republican voters, right under the economy, much higher than Democratic voters in dealing with the deficit. And they're very, very fed up with the dysfunction and with the, you know, the sort of inability of Congress and government to take on tough problems. You know, they think it's childish. And independent voters said to me, you know, if I didn't do my job, you know, we can pretty much expect that Congress is going to do nothing very substantial between now and 2013. And one of the independent voters said to me, well, if I didn't do my job, I wouldn't get paid, you know, and they're not doing their job. So this 40% of American voters are looking for a home. Now, I mentioned the New Republic Review. A typical sort of criticism of paying attention to the independent voters is the idea that they aren't very significant, that their numbers are not very significant, that they really are all just Democratic and Republican leaners, and they just call themselves independents because it's cool or they don't want to be attached to a particular party. Using Pew polling, using exit polling, using a variety of academic sources, I think my estimate is pretty good. And it is an estimate because they're swing voters, because they might have voted for Bill, if they're old enough, Ronald Reagan. They might have voted for Bill Clinton. They might have voted for George Bush. They might have voted for Obama. They swing. They change their affiliation. You know, as John said, they voted Democrat in 2006. They voted Democrat in 2008 by a slightly bigger margin. They went 19 points Republican in 2010. They weren't happy with what was going on. So I think half of all the registered independent voters are truly independent, based on all these sources that I've mentioned. That's about 20% of the electorate, a fifth. is truly independent. Now, they don't always turn out, and that is another thing that, you know, people criticize. Well, they turn out in lower numbers. But here's the thing. In half the states in the country, they're not allowed to participate in primaries. So obviously that dampens enthusiasm. When you're paying for elections with your tax dollars, and the government and the parties, or the parties essentially, are telling you you can't participate if you're not registered, that to me is anti-democratic. That is not a full democracy. And I think in some ways, if it was happening in another country, we would be critical of it. About 20%. And that 40% of independents, and 2.5 million people in the last 2 years, 4 years, have left the Democratic and Republican parties and become independents. And that 40% is the highest it's been since Gallup has been keeping track in more than half a century. So I think it definitely reflects dissatisfaction. They're the largest voting bloc. Independents are the largest voting bloc in the nation. And they're really tired of being ignored and unrepresented and not having a say in how government and politics is run. I use the metaphor of, I've used this all over, I think especially for the Libertarians, this is not too racy. I use the metaphor of a one-night stand. And the idea that politicians woo the independent voters. You know, obviously there's going to be a lot of talk. You know, Obama will move to the center. I think we can anticipate. Romney just recently said he's for keeping the interest rate low on student loans. I think we can anticipate Romney's move to the center. But once the election is over, they quickly go back to keeping their party leaders happy, keeping their people who give them money happy, keeping the Tea Party and MoveOn.org happy, because these are who they see as their base, and these are the people they feel they are beholden to in between elections. And you know, recently, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, Ken Conrad, was on MSNBC, and he said something, to me, it was a really stunning interview. You know, he held a hearing on the president's, the Deficit Reduction Commission report, which was issued at the end of 2010 and promptly died. Although, you know, the Gang of Six, various people tried to resuscitate it, keep it on life support, but it was not embraced either by the president or by party leaders. He held a hearing on it last week, and he was on Chuck Todd's show, and he immediately then dropped it. He immediately said, well, no budget, we're not going to forget it, we're not dealing with this. And Chuck Todd asked him about this, and he essentially admitted that the leadership had told him to cool it. He essentially said, until the leadership of both parties, really, because with, you know, with all of the rules in the Senate, things can grind to a halt, even if the minority doesn't want them to. The leadership, and until the leadership of both parties and the president want to do deficit reduction, we won't have deficit reduction. The leadership shuts these members down. And, you know, you heard that from Olympia Snowe when she announced a couple of months ago that she was leaving the Senate. It's very hard to be in the middle. It's very hard to try to govern, to try to actually get something done, to work on compromise. Ron Wyden from Oregon had, he toils in the vineyards. He always has these bipartisan efforts. He has one on tax reform. He works with Republicans, and it never gets anywhere because the leadership doesn't want it to. The leadership wants it to be about us and them, the Republicans and the Democrats. We're right and they're wrong, and there's no gray area. And, you know, that's not how you govern. The American people, I mean, it would be how you govern if you had the presidency and both houses